If you're new to the channel, we build C8 how-to guides. I'm Maverick.
I'm Chase.
And both of us ordered C8 Corvettes.
Sort of.
Except one of us was a little too impatient for the 2-year wait.
Yep, so I bought a Supra.
And it's a little bit better of a comparison than you think when it comes to modifying these two platforms. C8 Corvette has the 6.2 liter LT2 engine making 490 horsepower, 495 horsepower if you have the Z51 package.
And the Supra's got the BMW B58 in it, and this one makes 382 from the factory.
And that's just what that is, though. That is a BMW. It's
pretty much.
Over the last couple weeks, we've been working on this car, and it is very much a BMW, which we still haven't figured out if it's a good thing or a bad thing, because working on it's a little difficult compared to your standard Japanese car that you can modify.
Is it though?
It is. It is. I guess you'll just have to figure that out for yourself. Over the next couple months, we'll be building both of these cars. We'll be spending about the same amount of money to make about the same amount of power, and then you can decide whether you're Team Supra or Team C8. For this episode, we're going to lower both cars.
Wait a minute. Much better, Dad.
Oh, Jesus. Come on. Not all Corvette owners dress like this. I mean, I don't know. We went to Cars and Coffee recently. And no joke. Every Corvette owner had a shirt that matched their hat, that matched... Oh, someone had Corvette shoes. Wait, if I have to wear this... What? Why do you get to wear that?
Because you have to wear this.
But those are like normal street clothes.
Well, I didn't buy a Vette.
Jesus Christ. Sports cars, they both make decent power from the factory. They both handle relatively well. I'd say one advantage the Vette has is all the weight's over the rear axle, so it really hooks up and moves.
As this spins.
Yeah, it spins a lot. In sport mode, even bone stock, it loses traction constantly, which can be fun, but it's also not great for performance. Both these cars can make decent power unopened. You know, the engine's still together, the transmission, you know, still in the car without removing it. I think both cars are limited by their transmissions to about 700 wheel torque.
I want to say the Supra's around 650 torque, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, but they're pretty close, essentially. Like the Corvette, once you hit about that 650 to 700 wheel torque mark, you have to drop the engine and transmission out the bottom and change the clutch packs in the basket. So we're both limited by that. If it gets to that point, we actually build that later on down the road, we'll definitely film it, but that's kind of like the max. So if you're watching this video and you expect us to make, you know, 1100, 1200 horsepower, it's probably not going to happen
yet.
All right, so for the first episode, we decided let's lower the cars because the wheel gap on these is pretty crazy from the factory. Honestly, the C8 wasn't that bad. The Supra was atrocious.
Yeah, it looked like a monster truck.
It was crazy. There's 3 ways to lower the C8 Corvette. You have the factory option Z51 coilovers, which have a threaded shock body. You can spin these spinners and raise and lower the spring 0.7 of an inch. If that's not enough for you, you can find yourself some lowering springs, either from Eibach or Paragon sells a set. There might be some others out there. I might be forgetting some. That's okay. They're nothing less than what you can get. For this build, we chose to go with Eibach. They've been around a long time and they're well trusted. I'm not going to worry about the struts blowing out. For the rears, you're going to want to open the rear hatch, put it pretty high up in the air, and then for the upper strut, in the rear of the car, there's 3 13mm nuts. You're going to want to remove those, and then everything else we're going to do is down inside the fender well. You're going to remove these 4 15mm bolts. As you can see in the front side of the control arm, you have to remove this fender liner, and there's an aluminum block here. The aluminum block is held in by 2 10mm bolts. You're going to have to remove those, set the block to the side to access that inner bolt. When you reassemble, this is fairly difficult, and some people cross-thread them in, so just be very careful. Make sure you get the bolts lined up. It's kind of frustrating. You can do it, get it in there, use a second jack to support the lower control. The lower strut bolt and nut is a 21mm on both sides. It also has the sway bar end link attached to it, so remove that, get that out of the way, pull the control arm out, and pull the strut out and towards the back of the car. Once you have it out, you can put it on the spring compressor, swap your factory springs for the I-box. All right, so for the front struts, you pull the plastic underneath the front, pull the side pieces, and you pull this bit, get it out of your way, and then you have the top of the strut towers here. There's 3 13mm nuts on top of the studs, on top of the factory strut. So you pull those 3 13mm bolts, and then come on down here. You have 4 15mm bolts connecting the upper control arm to the chassis. You're going to pull those 4 15mm bolts. You do not need to disconnect the upper ball joint on here, but when you remove the 3 13mm nuts on top of the strut and you remove the 21mm nut and bolt on the lower side of the strut, you should be able to pull the control arm out, slide the strut out the front or back side. So it makes it 10 times easier if on the passenger side you have the steering wheel turned all the way to the right while you're working on it, and then for the driver's side you have the steering wheel turned all the way to the left. It just gives you some more room. That way you don't have to disconnect this upper ball joint. And that's all it takes to lower the C8 Corvette. Check that out. It needs to settle a little bit, but we've closed some of that fender gap both on the front and rear. Looks 10 times better than it did before. Should ride about the same based on the advertised spring rates. All right, now on the Supra, there's 3 different ways to lower it. You have airbags, coilovers, and then you have lowering springs. Airbags are kind of common, especially with the wide body versions or the builds that people are doing. Coilovers, a little bit more common, but you know, who wants to ride around static all the time with their car completely dumped? And then you have lowering springs, and since we went with the I-box lowering springs on the C8, we might as well go with it on the Supra. I don't like you with that first one, huh? Boom. This is way harder than it should be, and you know why? Huh? Because of that right there. It's just going to be pulling these, putting the compressor on, and popping that off. What we ended up doing is we both ended up going with Eibach. We lowered the front and rear. I think collectively we can agree that the Supra was harder to lower than the Corvette.
I would say the Supra, the rear bolts on the Supra were definitely the worst part of either car.
Yeah, definitely. And actually the way the upper control arms are set up on the C8 and the way you have to like get them aligned before you run the bolts in, it's really easy to cross thread the bolts. So both different than our standard cars that we've modified in the past. But that rear bolt, I'll agree. The rear bolt on the Supra in the control arm, right? The knuckle to the control arm,
yep.
It took forever. Absolutely forever. And we have the proper tools, so it's a little frustrating. So on the Supra, how low did you go in the front?
So Eibach has it as a 1.7 inch drop up front and a 1.2 in the rear.
Okay. And have you scraped on anything since we lowered it?
No, I haven't scraped on anything.
That's the problem with the Corvette is it only went down an inch, and even with it only being an inch, it still scrapes on everything because the air dam in the front. And you know, the sides are fine. The back is fine, even with the diffuser that's on there, but the front, it's only an inch, and it scrapes. And it's the same, it's the Eibach Pros, essentially the same lowering kit that you put on the Supra. So how does it handle?
It handles good. It definitely stiffened up a lot, which is nice.
Well, that's also surprising because this, I feel like, feels exactly the same. And I'll put the spring rates on the screen, but honestly, it feels exactly the same.
That sucks.
Yeah, it kind of did, but it dropped it, and that was the point. We just want to close that wheel gap, or the fender to wheel gap, and yeah, you guys will find out soon why. So in the next episode of this series, we're going to relieve some back pressure on both cars. I think the Supra is going to pick up more power in this, but we're going to find out.
Probably does. Terrible actor. What am I supposed to do? Just I awkwardly stand there and look at the camera, look at Mav, look at the camera, look at the car, look at the Mav, look at the camera.